It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. This is another episode of Frontline Friday with my very special guest, Bridget Gleason. Bridget, how are you today?
Andy, I am doing great this morning. How are you?
Good. How was your run?
My run was good. I'm glad you know that I am a very routine-oriented. Some would say like a little white rat. Do the same thing over and over. So had a great run today.
So do you run through a maze like a white rat?
Well, if you consider running through streets, because I like to stay where it's lit because it's dark.
Yeah.
Maybe a bit of a maze.
And do you vary your path? Let's see how much of a creature of habit you are. Do you vary your path or you run the same route every day?
I have 3 or 4, like during the week, 3 or 4 different routes that I choose from. But I do one of those 3 to 4 routes. And part of it is part of it's because I'm a creature of habit. The second is that I know exactly how long it takes. Mm-hmm. And so if I have a time constraint, which I often do, I just like to know that, I know if I leave at this time, I'm going to get back at this time. And that tends to be important for me in the morning, during the week. The weekends, it's much more varied.
Okay. And do you ever run the routes backwards? Not running backwards, but reverse the direction. Okay.
Yes, I do.
Got to keep the mind active while you run. All right, so what were you listening to on your run this morning?
I was listening to a book by Mark. I think it's Mark Goldstein. And the name of the book is Going to Pieces Without Falling Apart. Some may think, wow, what's going on in your life that you're reading Going to Pieces Without Falling Apart? It's a really interesting book. Mark Epstein on just meditation and mindfulness. It's a great book. And things like this I like to read to keep myself in the mental state that I need to be in, where I am both relaxed and happy and content, but also high performing and being able to really contribute at the level that I want to contribute at.
Okay. All right. We have a mini book club that we just went through with How to Go to Pieces Without Falling Apart by Mark Epstein. Okay. On my list.
Really great book.
Okay.
Add it to the list.
Add it to the list. Well, I've got a long list right now because I'm doing a lot of research for my next book. And so, I've got, unfortunately, I have a lot of plane travel coming up. So I'll be doing a lot of reading. You see me on a plane and I've got my nose in my iPad. I'm researching.
Then we'll know not to bother you.
Yeah, well, I've got my headphones on anyway, so a lot of the times I'm not very approachable on the planes. So, all right. So today, let's talk about a specific aspect of sales leadership, because when you hear this term, sales leader, sales leadership in general, we tend to think that this is all about people that have sort of, management responsibility. And I think in sales that sales, and I've written about this, that sales leadership really begins with the individual, the salesperson themselves. Because, and sort of when I'd first written about this, sort of the inspiration was this article I read about Delta Airlines, and a quote one of the executives had given, or was in the article, saying that yet each of Delta's 80,000 employees have the opportunity to be leaders in how they handle unpredictable situations, how they use the company's resource, and how they take care of the customer. And I was reading that, I thought, well, gosh, that's a perfect definition of sales leadership, right? Salespeople must be able to adapt to changing requirements, the prospects, be able to help them by leading them to make a good decision, be able to bring to bear the resources of the company to make that happen. And so for me, sales leadership starts at the individual level.
I would agree with that 100%.
All right, we're done. Talk to you next time.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to talking about running. No. So, the thing that I often talk to people on my teams about is this notion of leadership, particularly individuals that have aspirations to move into a leadership role. And I talk about the same thing, that there are lots of ways to demonstrate leadership and to be a leader that doesn't have anything to do with a formal position or a hierarchy.
Without being a manager.
But rather, I'm sorry?
Without being a manager. Yeah, you don't need to be a manager to be a leader.
Correct. And a lot of it is just how do you interact and how are you perceived by peers and people who you don't have authority, so to speak, over. And so I agree. I encourage them to think of ways to lead without having the position, the formal position. And I think that's what you're also referring to. And I love that you have that the airlines, that the individuals have an opportunity to demonstrate leadership just in the way that they interact with customers and passengers and people that they're working with, their peers.
Yeah, well, a classic definition of leadership sort of revolves around this idea of inspiring others to take actions based on the actions of the leader themselves. So, I always love this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson, what you do speak so loudly, I cannot hear what you say. So,
I love that.
Yeah, and it's really applicable to a salesperson. So if you're a sales professional and you're listening to the show, which I know you do, is you are the frontline sales leader. It's your responsibility to inspire the buyer to go on this journey with you, which is going to culminate in an order.
Yeah, and it could be, are we inspiring them to go on the journey with us? Or I sort of think we're on their journey.
Well, it is, but it's a journey we're taking together.
But it's a journey. I agree with the inspirational part. Can we inspire them to allow them to let us help lead them along the journey that they're already on?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very powerful concept.
And a lot of it starts with this idea of being in service to the customer. It's not, a lot of times people think, well, gosh, if I'm serving somebody, I'm not really leading them, right? But actually you do.
Doesn't it gets back to that, Andy, this term, servant leadership or
mm-hmm.
servant style leadership. And it does get back to that, but there's also a lot about leadership that is really about serving. And I always feel like while I may have the title of a manager, or someone may have a director title or a VP title, that title actually is just, I serve the people who work for me. I work for them in some ways and in more ways. That my job is to create this environment where they can be successful. And I've often said and told my teams that my job is not to motivate, but my job is to create an environment where motivated people can be successful. And so in that way, I see myself very much as a servant leader, mm-hmm. that I've got to lay the groundwork so that they can be successful. And in the same way, individuals on sales teams can also demonstrate leadership sort of in that same way, in the way that they extend help to colleagues and are share best practices. There's a lot they can do around that, the servant concept of leadership, that I think goes a long way.
And it also goes back to what you talked about, is creating this environment where motivated individuals can succeed, is that you're creating an environment where people can feel empowered to take initiative, demonstrate leadership, to make things happen. I'm always struck by reading a book like Band of Brothers or any of the other Ambrose books that were those oral histories of what happened on D-Day, and Stephen Ambrose's books about D-Day and World War II and the invasion of Normandy. And there's one part that really stood out for me, that somebody was sort of comparing and contrasting what made the American soldier so effective, the common soldier. And it was this feeling of being empowered, if not also trained, to take command, show leadership when the situation arose without being told specifically what to do, right? Whereas contrasting with other armies, the command and control structure is so stiff and rigid that soldiers in certain situations perish because they're waiting for commands from their leaders, as opposed to sort of the expectation we have. I mean, it's part of our culture as well in the country is you're in the situation, step up.
Yeah, and that's an important one, Andy, in sales, because you can have a sales process that's defined, you can have messaging that's laid out, you can have assets that are delivered, there's a lot that the company and an organization can provide to a salesperson. But in the moment, there's that one-on-one interaction. And as you say, that's when it's time to step up and think on your feet and be prepared, and all these other things that nobody can do for you. And like you said, it's a great place to exhibit leadership, even if it's just in that interaction between you and a prospect or you and a customer.
I mean, we have this.
You assumed that role.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you, but we have this idea that's seemingly pervasive, becoming a little more pervasive, quite frankly, in sales, as we bring more automation and so on to the task, is that everything's reduced to a process, and the process replicates every sales situation perfectly, one to the next. As you said, we've got a defined process. And that's all great until you actually talk to the customer, because it's a person talking to a person, and no two sales transactions, at least to my experience, have ever been identical. It's like the expression Mike Tyson had about, everybody has a plan to fight me until I hit them in the face, right? And, it's like, once you really confront the customer, then, the script goes out the window to a certain degree. I mean, it'll take you so far, but at some point, unless you have a highly transactional sale and you're just, it's either close, no close on the first call, if you have any sort of complexity to the sale, it's going to be on its own path. The deal and the prospect.
And that's what's so much fun about sales, is it's being able to, on one hand, recognize patterns and be able to see where the commonality is and use that as a path to make things move along more easily or with less friction. But then also, what is the uniqueness of this individual in this sale, in this environment? That sometimes it's very nuanced, but those nuances can be the difference between closing a deal and not. And that is what I love also about sales, is that for the most part, it's not cookie cutter. There's a lot of similarities, but you and I've talked on more than one occasion about people who say the salesperson is going away, that they're going to be obsolete, we're not going to need them. But as long as people are involved, humans are involved on the buy side, I believe that humans will be involved also on the sell side. And that's what makes it so interesting.
Well, arguably, you can make the case. And I just spoke this week with, interviewed Brent Adamson, who co-author of The Challenger Sale and The Challenger Customer. And if you haven't read The Challenger Customer, not just you, Bridget, you may have, but anybody listening, I really urge them to read that book. I like the Challenger sale, but I'm a big fan of the Challenger customer. To me, a much better book. But the message is that, we've talked about this idea, or it's, sort of become common in just the last year or so since I published the book, that, 5.4 stakeholders in every decision. And based on our latest research, actually, Brent told me this week that number is now 6.8, based on their research with, large B2B complex sales environments, buying environments. So you think about the point that they make in the book, that's not that there are that number of people, but it's how diverse those people are in their roles and responsibilities and the perspectives they bring to this task of buying something. And yeah, it's really hard to say, okay, we've got a process that we can map out well in advance that is going to be adhered to by this organization that's buying this product or service from us. It's impossible. Because you're dealing with humans, and these humans are not all from the same department, they don't all have the same background, same agendas, same perspectives. So, this idea of the sales professional as the leader really becomes even more important when you start looking at these environments where you have this large, expanding number, not just a large number, but an expanding number of stakeholders that you have to bring together and get a consensus from in order to move forward to an order.
Andy, I haven't read The Challenger Customer. And now I'm intrigued by it. What is you've talked a little bit about it just right now, but basic premise, net, what is it? What is that book?
Well, probably net is that they sort of turn the table, and they're saying that what's really happening in larger organizations, enterprise that are going through these purchases is that that they don't really have a process, right? The problem is oftentimes when they go and start a program, to buy a product or service, is they don't really necessarily know at the beginning who these stakeholders are that are going to be involved. Mm. So it's right. So they do a great job laying out the different. They sort of categorize different types of stakeholders, and it's mapped back eventually to sort of the Challenger sale in terms of how you identify the right ones to lead, basically, right? To work with, and. It's what's that? It's almost more of a problem. They almost position it more of a problem from the customer's perspective. They have a challenge buying, and so how do we map what we do from a selling standpoint onto their challenges? How do we help them get to the point? As a statistic that I talk about in the book, that for CEOs who, based on the research they talk about, oftentimes sort of say, we don't. We know what's going on, but we don't make that sort of that decision, right? Or is that the decision is not most important about, is it the optimum technical solution, the optimum business solution for us? Is it a solution that I can get buy-in from my organization? That's a more important criteria to them. So that buy-in really relates to this whole idea of all these stakeholders that are involved in the decision making.
Fascinating. I'm getting that. You've sold me. You've sold one more copy. I hope you get something for that. I hope there's some sort of royalty and kickback going back to you.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that's right. Every author that comes on this show, I get a kickback if the book's sold. Nope. They did a great job writing it. It sells itself, I think. It's a lot of very research based, and that's I think what sort of separates some of what they write versus a lot of sales books, even some of my own, is it's just surveying, understand their large enterprise customers that they serve, and digging really deep into what's happening in their process. And then they do a great job laying it out very clearly, and they're good writers, entertaining style, what the challenge is for salespeople. An organization, so it's well worth reading. So we've had too many book clubs. Not too, I didn't mean too many, but we had 2 small book clubs today. So bonus for people listening. So getting back briefly to sales leadership. So last point on this to talk about today is it's a trait that you and I both agree is really important and valuable for someone who wants to succeed in sales as an individual contributor. But I've never seen leadership put into a job description for a sales rep position or an account exec position. We always get the heroic terms, hunter, closer, or extrovert, aggressive, blah, 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 blah. But we never see leadership.
How would you anticipate that would show up in a job description for an individual contributor, other than without the words leadership in it? Well, what are some of the traits? And I'm asking because I think it's a great observation.
Well, what if you put in the job description, demonstrated leadership skills? Let's just say, right? Not that that's an optimal term. I think the bigger question is, how do you screen for it? If you have that in the job description, then you get all these resumes and you start talking to candidates. You narrow some down. How do you? And I'm not sort of saying I necessarily have the answer, but how do we? What are the questions we ask to start drawing that out?
When I screen for anything, Andy, I see that success leaves tracks. Leadership leaves tracks. I mean, even somebody right out of school, if you look back at their background, you can often see evidence of leadership based on the extracurricular activities maybe that they were involved in and what their roles were. So I typically dig in a little bit to some of the roles and I look for it. So let's say it's not, I hadn't thought about leadership in the way that you're describing it, although the reason that I probe around leadership is because that often is, if someone's demonstrated leadership, it's often a good indicator of future success that I've seen in sales. Somebody that naturally is going to be a bit more proactive, they like that role, they're often a bit more confident. It just translates well to sales. But I haven't thought about it so much in the way that you have been describing today. And it sort of made me rethink how I want to screen and look for it and also nurture it in the people who work for me and who I work for.
Yeah, and as always, we'd be interested in feedback from the listeners of the show. If you, as a sales manager, you've been screening for, you've been looking for very consciously leadership capabilities and so on, and when you're hiring sales candidates, send us an email. Tell us what you do that works for you, and you can send that to Andy@zerotimeselling.com, and we'll talk about it on the air in a future episode. But it is you're absolutely right. Success leaves tracks, footprints, whatever you want to say, and oftentimes you're hiring people that are a little bit new, maybe straight out of school or just limited experience. There's things that they've done either at school or in their personal lives that, could be something that's a service orientation, some organization that they lead or whatever, that demonstrate that. And I think I look for those things as well. It's been more conscious over the years. I grew more conscious of being deliberate about looking for it. But intuitively sort of want to say, okay, well, what sets this person apart? Oftentimes what sets them apart is things they've done that have demonstrated leadership. Captain of a sports team, for instance. Oftentimes in sales, some people very consciously look for people that had athletic experience in college, let's say. But, for me, I always like, was this woman, was she captain of the soccer team? That, to me, is a step up. It's a recognition from the peers of the leadership that this person was providing. And does that carry over into sales and professional lives? I think it's a good indicator. You never guarantee, but it's a great indicator compared to something else.
Yeah, it's one signal. It's one signal that it can definitely be a good sign. I'm in agreement on that one.
Okay, well, good. All right, so any other thoughts on this point? Otherwise, we're going to wrap up for today.
I think that's good.
Okay.
Otherwise, we can talk about running again.
Well, we'll talk about running at the start of the next episode. I'm sure everybody's interested. Actually, yeah, I've been running a lot, as you know. I've got some events coming up. We'll talk about that next time.
That's right. That sounds great.
All right. So everybody, again, thanks for listening today. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your participation in the show. Again, if you have any questions, email them to me, Andy at zerotimeselling.com, and we will be sure to discuss them on the air. And Bridget, as always, thank you.
Likewise, Andy. Have a great day.
Talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.